Hey, greetings, Uhuru family. This is Ikemba Jore, co-host and writer at We Charge Colonialism, media and think tank. Welcome, Karibu, to another episode of the Pan-African Book Club. I'm going for Dolo today, so shout out to my comrades, my Ndugu, Frank and Natasha, who will not be joining this morning. But hopefully we'll have them back next week. But I'm gonna hold it down, man. So appreciate everybody for tapping in. We're gonna continue our reading of Frantz Fanon today, racism and culture. So this is the part 2 of what we were covering last week here on our platform. So again, we are We Charge Colonialism. Make sure that you follow us on all social media platforms. Subscribe to this channel if this is your first time here, and make sure that you like and share. I'm trying to see if we can get up to maybe 3,000 subscribers by the end of the month. So let's put that work in. If you can help us achieve that goal, it would greatly be appreciated. And the focus, or I should say, like the objective, is to reach as many of our people as possible, because the more minds that we can decolonize, the easier this process of overturning the system of colonialism will be. We have to have more people thinking and acting the way that we think and act, right? And wanting to get organized, wanting to be a part of an organization with a revolutionary agenda for African people. So with that being said, I want to get into it, but usually what we do, we start off with a weekly roundup. We look at some stories, and then we go into the reading, which I will share on the screen, but I will also provide a link in the chat when we get to the reading. So the first story I want to look at, I'm going to the continent, really going to occupied Tanzania today. I want to look at Namibia and what's taking place in occupied Tanzania, also known as South Africa. Came across this particular story. Make sure this thing looks good on the screen for you. So Namibia will offer free university education starting in 2026. Make that a little bigger. Yeah, so shout out to the president over there coming with the free education. As you can see, we have an African woman serving as the leader right now. New Namibian President Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah announced Thursday that her government will introduce free higher education at state universities and technical colleges starting next year. Nandi Ndaitwah, who was sworn in as Namibia's first female leader last month, made the announcement while delivering her State of the Nation speech to Parliament. I'm pleased to announce that for the next academic year, commencing 2026, tertiary education will become 100% subsidized by the government, she said. Right? And I just want to point out, like, this is some here I am in the United States of America, and we can't get a universally free education, higher education. And I have loans right now that I still have to pay back. And so you have over here in what's supposed to be the wealthiest country in the world, where people are going 100, 200, maybe even $300,000 in debt trying to get an education, and they tell us it's an investment. So it's worth it because it's an investment in your future and in your career. But you find yourself in this perpetual debt, and I guess that's why it's the wealthiest country in the world, right? Because those people who are a part of these corporations, these corporate Mongols are able to eat off of our education and our labor. Ain't that something? Off our education and our labor, we can't escape. But here we are in Namibia, so shout out to them. And then let me go through the rest of this. So Namibia already provides free education in public elementary and high schools, though parents still typically have to pay for school uniforms, stationery, books, and hostel fees. The new policy will remove tuition and registration fees at universities and colleges. There have been calls for years for all levels of education to be subsidized by the government in the country of around 3 million people in Southern Africa. We have heard your cries, Nandi Ndatwa said. She said the policy was aimed at improving opportunities for young people amid problems of youth employment and poverty. Around 2.1 million Namibians are under the age of 35. That's deep, man. 2.1 million out of a population of 3 million. This is according to official records. Two of Namibia's 7 universities are state-run and will offer free education under the policy. All of its 7 vocational training centers are government-run and will also no longer charge tuition fees. Yeah, so again, shout out to Namibia taking that charge. It still doesn't solve the problem of colonial capitalism, because at the end of the day, it is also about the type of education your people are receiving, the African people are receiving. But we do have to look, I personally think we do have to look on the bright side of the fact that we are giving opportunities for Africans to at least be able to compete in this under imperialist and neo-colonial conditions is a great thing. Now, because those who are receiving it at least have these opportunities and becoming educated, you see that historically these are people who have been the most vocal and resistant to colonial capitalism, and primarily because they have this education, but they don't have the quote unquote opportunities within the current structure. And so that brings about resistance, and it brings about a call for change and more opportunities. So, big up to what's going on there, and hopefully we see more changes. We need to see more universal. We just need all out socialism. People, we pay for it anyway with our labor, by our production. At the end of the day, the production of goods and services should pay for or I should say goods, right? Should be able to pay for all of those services that's needed. At least the basic needs, right? Food, clothing, shelter. Basic needs should be provided. Education, right? Healthcare. These things because you need people to even to be able to have a viable economy, a simulated economy. You need people working. You need people to be able to get from point A to point B. That's why here, like in New York and in Philadelphia, where I go back and forth, I'm calling for the abolishment of the fare. We need to abolish the fare that people are paying to go to school, to go to these jobs, just so that they can build up this capitalist infrastructure anyway. It benefits the capitalists, but this goes back to the end of slavery, or the end of chattel slavery, when it was understood by the ruling class that, hey, we're still going to be able to exploit them, a deeper form of oppression and exploitation, because now we don't even have to worry about spending. This is the capitalist. This is the ruling class. We don't have to worry about spending resources on the health of the working class. We don't have to worry about spending resources on educating the working class. We don't have to worry about sheltering the working class. They can work for us, and they have to do these things on their own. So the same money that we are receiving from our production goes back to the very people who are exploiting our labor. Hold on, let me see what kind. Hey, Uhuru Conrad. Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, do that for sure. Make sure you do that. So I'm gonna get into this next story, and then we're gonna get into Fanon. so many contradictions. This is just an update on a ongoing story with Trump and his support of of these white colonizers in South Africa or occupied Tanzania. So this story right here, here we go. Make that a little bigger. Isn't it something? U.S. focuses on persecution claims as white South Africans seek resettlement. Here you are with Africans being persecuted all over the world, and even in our own backyard here, where I'm based in the United States, we have Black folks who are being persecuted. But Donald Trump and this administration is also concerned about white South Africans who set up an apartheid regime that lasted for decades in South Africa. And so because that contradiction was overturned, right, and these colonizers are no longer able to exploit, well, I'm going to say utilize the state to oppress African people, because economic exploitation by Europeans is still going on. Even after apartheid, we have economic apartheid, but that still isn't enough for colonizers, man. Colonizers is never enough for colonizers. They always need more. And this is why I can't entertain conversations about capitalism, Black capitalism, any kind of capitalism, whoever the face is, because it's an exploitative system. And I bring this up too because I was at a summit here at the school, a Black empowerment summit, and there was this one person on the panel list. I don't know why they chose him to be on the panel, but he was talking about embracing capitalism, and and he made a comment about socialism and just kept on advocating that, hey, capitalism, as if capitalism was the answer, and Black people need to embrace capitalism. And this is the problem that we have. And Frantz Fanon gets into this in his writings when he's talking about it's sort of like this adoption, like the continued oppression and exploitation of African people, culturally and structurally and culturally, has the psychological impact on African people. Whereas though they feel the answer is assimilation, it is adopting the values of the oppressor and the exploiter. And this is what happens. This idea that we should embrace capitalism, a system that has been forced on us by these colonizers as the answer, has a lot to do with systemic oppression and exploitation, biologically, physically, culturally, and otherwise. So let me get into this, and then we're going to get into some Fanon, right? So this article, Johannesburg, Washington, puts out this story, the 24th. U.S. officials have interviewed white South Africans seeking refugee status about their troubles with land disputes, crime, and perceived racism, while refugees from other countries are being deported or barred from the United States. How do these colonizers think that they have a dispute over land that they stole? Man, it's mind-boggling to me. Some of the South African applicants have taken part in the first round of interviews in Pretoria. 3 of them told Reuters, describing positive encounters with U.S. officials who seem well disposed toward them in their accounts of persecution. Interesting. More than 30 applicants have already been approved, according to a person familiar with the matter. The staff at the embassy were exceptionally friendly, said Mark, a South African farmer who did not wish his family name to be published as the process is confidential. I could feel they had empathy. The U.S. administration and embassy in Pretoria declined to comment or give numbers of interviews and approvals. U.S. President Donald Trump issued a February 7th executive order that called for the U.S. to resettle Afrikaner refugees. It said Afrikaners, who are descendants of mostly Dutch early settlers, were victims of unjust racial discrimination. Unjust racial discrimination. Man, sometimes, man, some things can go without being said. So I'm gonna let that sit, because I know you all are thinking what I'm thinking right now. So the order came after Trump had suspended all U.S. refugee admissions, citing security and cost concerns. Thousands of Afghans, Congolese, and other fleeing conflict were blocked after they had been vetted and cleared. The International Organization for Migration, a UN agency that helps people displaced by conflict, natural disasters, and other major crises, declined the U.S. administration request to insist in resettling Afrikaners, the person familiar with the matter said. The IOM did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Accounts from applicants who have been interviewed, the number of people approved so far, and a request to the IOM have not previously been reported. 2 U.S. refugee officers traveled to Pretoria to conduct interviews, said 2 U.S. Department of Homeland Security officials, adding that some applicants who said Black South Africans had persecuted them had gained preliminary approval. I imagine some applicants will be denied, as we do in all cases, said one official, speaking on condition of anonymity, because they were not authorized to discuss internal details about the process. But I think there is an administrative pressure to approve these. Thrilled about Trump's order, Mark emailed the U.S. Embassy the next day stating that he and his father had suffered grave injuries in a 2023 attack on their family farm. I'm stop there. I think we get the gist of this story, man. But it's interesting because this is white supremacy at its best. This is racism, as Fanon gets into racism and culture at its best. And the fact that there's Black people who are here in the United States that are being persecuted in cities that they live in and in towns that they live in, where the Department of Justice is always exposing some form of racist acts by institutions in the United States, whether it's the banking institution or the judicial institution, right? Things are being uncovered. But Donald Trump has to go, and this administration has to go all the way across the water to help people who are being persecuted and discriminated against, quote unquote, unjustly. And this is why history is so important, because when we see the response to racism and the response to colonialism taking place all around the world by African people and other colonized people, we have to be able to come with the receipts and the records and show the justification for certain policies, right? To undo centuries of diversity. I'm sorry, not diversity, to overcome centuries of exclusion, white inclusion, and Black or African exclusion. And so when we fight to try to balance it, if we don't have the history behind us to be able to have these arguments, and I think that's the problem too that we have. We have people who are supposed to be representing the Black community who are in these positions of power, and they're unable to articulate the reason, the gaslighting that is taking place when we're in these spaces and fighting for our advancement, or fighting for social justice, or whatever it may be. But we fight for liberation. That's the ultimate goal. So with that being said, I don't want to take up too much time on this. I want to go right to the reading, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the link to Frantz Fanon's Toward the African Revolution in the chat. And while I'm doing that, hooroo to the family, everybody out there, make sure to like, make sure to share. And if this is your first time, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And we're going to get right to this. All right, so there we are. I'm starting on page 37 for those who want to follow along, but I'm going to pull it up on the screen. Let's get to it. Frantz Fanon at its finest. So a time, it looked as though racism had disappeared. And maybe I should go back to 36. I'm going to get some more. And again, we're following up. We started this chapter last week, so I want to start. Yeah, I want to start here. Racism to come back to America. Racism to come back to America haunts and vitiates American culture. And this dialectical gangrene is exacerbated by the coming to awareness and the determination of millions of Negroes and Jews to fight this racism by which they are victimized. This passion-charged, irrational, groundless phase. One second here. The groundless phase, when one examines it, reveals a frightful visage. The movement of groups, the liberation in certain parts of the world of men previously kept down, make for a more and more precarious equilibrium. Rather unexpectedly, the racist group points accusingly to a manifestation of racism among the oppressed. This is exactly what I just said. This is what I'm talking. Rather unexpectedly, the racist group points accusingly to a manifestation of racism among the oppressed. How many times we've heard reverse racism? Racism in reverse. The intellectual primitivism of the period of exploitation gives way to the medieval, in fact, prehistoric fanaticism of the period of the liberation. For a time, it looked as though racism had disappeared. This soul-soothing, unreal impression was simply the consequence of the evolution of forms of exploitation. Psychologists spoke of a prejudice having become unconscious. The truth is that the rigor of the system made the daily affirmation of a superiority superfluous. The need to appeal to various degrees of approval and support to the natives' cooperation modified relations in a less crude, more subtle, more cultivated direction. It was not rare, in fact, to see a democratic and humane ideology at this stage. The commercial undertaking of enslavement, of cultural destruction, progressively gave way to a verbal mystification. The interesting thing about this evolution is that racism was taken as a topic of meditation, sometimes even as a publicity technique. And like leading up to this, and he may bring it back up, but one of the things that Fanon is talking about, which you can also find in Du Bois' work, you can find in Martin Delaney's work, but he's talking about how the racism that was based off of physical characteristics, color, skin, or something about our DNA, our genetics, right? That is scientific proof that we are inferior people. That brings about the racism. That shifts to a cultural racism. Now we're no longer inferior or subjected to colonial conditions because of the color of our skin or because we're African or indigenous. We're now, there's something about our culture that causes this relationship, this power dynamic. So it's something that we have to change about ourselves. So think about the impact that has on someone psychologically. And this goes to Du Bois and the soul of Black folk when he talks about this double consciousness. This is the impact of colonialism. This verbal mystification is interesting too. He really doesn't unpack this Well, he kind of, but when he's talking about this verbal mystification, it's sort of using language to misdirect acts of racism on the on those who are colonized, those who are oppressed. And so it's a language that they use that kind of confused. We see this with the argument with the DEI. That's when I talk about gaslighting. Not just that, but I think that that's an example right there. But even the way that our culture is described and how we're described by the colonizer is done in a way where most people do not see that this is white supremacist ideology being used against us. It's being couched in such a way in flowery, language that we don't see the racism. The conscious does, but the masses sometimes miss it. So the interesting thing about this evolution is that racism was taken as a topic of meditation, sometimes even as a publicity technique. Thus, the blues, the black slave lament, was offered up for the admiration of the oppressors. This modicum of stylized oppression is the exploiters and the race's rightful due. Without oppression and without racism, you have no blues. You have no hip hop. The end of racism would sound the knell of great Negro music. As the all too famous Tony B might say, the blues are the slave's response to the challenge of oppression. Excuse me. Still today, for many men, even colored, Armstrong's music has a real meaning only in this perspective. Racism bloats and disfigures the face of the culture that practices it. Literature, the plastic art, songs for shop girls, proverbs, habits, patterns, whether they set out to attack it or to vulgarize it, restores racism. This means that a social group, a country, a civilization cannot be unconsciously racist. We say once again that racism is not an accidental discovery. It was not a hidden, dissimulated element. No superhuman efforts are needed to bring it out. Racism stares one in the face, for it so happens that it belongs in a characteristic whole, that of the shameless exploitation of one group of men by another, which has reached a higher stage of technical development. This is why military and economic oppression generally proceeds, make possible, and legitimizes racism. And so I'm glad Fanon brings this up because, in the I'm a member of the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement, and in the Uhuru movement, our theoretical framework, which is given to us by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, is African internationalism. And one thing the chairman talks about is the fight against colonialism and not necessarily racism. And why is that? And I think Fanon is getting to this to the point of like, what is the fundamental contradiction, right? So it's not to say that racism does not have an impact, because it does, and it needs to be rooted out. But understanding that we can like each other all day, but if we don't have the power or the resources to be able to determine our destiny, then it doesn't matter if another people is able to determine that. And so, from now right here, he talks about one group of men by another, which has reached a higher stage of technical development. Just to go back. So racism stares one in the face, for it so happens that it belongs in a characteristic whole, that of the shameless exploitation of one group of men by another, which has reached that group of men, right? That other group of men that reached a higher stage of technical development, right? The Gatling gun, right? How they was able to take Africa with that. So this is why military and economic oppression generally precedes, makes possible, and legitimizes racism. The habit of considering racism as a mental quirk, as a psychological flaw, must be abandoned. But the men who are a prey to racism, the enslaved, exploited, weakened social group, how do they behave? What are their defense mechanisms? What attitudes do we discover here? And in an initial phase, we have seen the occupying power legitimizing its domination by scientific arguments. So legitimizing imperialism, legitimizing colonialism. I'm just making it plain, right? So through scientific arguments, the inferior race being denied on the basis of race, because no other solution is left it. The racialized social group tries to imitate the oppressor and thereby to deracialize itself. The inferior race denies itself as a different race. It shares with the superior race the convictions, doctrines, and other attitudes concerning it. Yo, should we stop here, comrades? Man, do we need to even go any further? Should we let that sink in for a week? No, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep going. But come on, y'all. Let's do the knowledge on this again. Let's read this again. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that, Conrad. I don't know what's going on with that, but I'll get on it this week in Kruma. But I'm gonna go back to this right here because this is what we, as those who consider themselves in the know, the conscious, right, the revolutionary, the ones who understand the impact of colonialism and is fighting to liberate ourselves and our people from these conditions. We have this understanding, but think about, like, this is who we're trying to organize. And also this is what we're dealing with when we're talking about neo-colonialists. And what attitudes do we discover here? And the people who are colonized, how they behave and how they are thinking. In the initial phase, we have seen the occupying power legitimizing its domination by scientific arguments. The inferior race or the oppressed group, right, the colonized, being denied on the basis of who they are, of their race, of who they are, whether they're African or whether they are one of the indigenous groups of the Americas. Because no other solution is left it, the racialized social group tries to imitate the oppressor and thereby to deracialize itself. How many people we talk to? I ain't African. I'm an American. I'm Black Brit. I'm French. How many people do we hear? Not just past. I ain't talking about 60 years ago. We hear people talking like that today. This is part of this process, though. It shares with the superior race the convictions, doctrines, and other attitudes concerning it. That's a contradiction when you share the same values and principles as the person who is oppressing and exploiting you. And this goes back to my initial statement before I started reading about this brother who was talking about capitalism and embracing capitalism, right? He's basically telling us to embrace colonialism, embrace imperialism. And so when we see the actions of the imperialists around the world, when they can go to the very land that they had abducted African people from, and we can support them going to these lands and continuing the policies of colonialism, it shows that there's some serious contradictions that need to be overturned. So this event, which is commonly designated as alienation, is nationally very important. It is found in the official text under the name of assimilation. This alienation is never wholly successful, whether or not it is because the oppressor quantitatively and qualitatively limits the evolution, unforeseen, disparate phenomena manifest themselves. The inferiorized group had admitted, since the force of reasoning was implacable, that his misfortunes resulted directly from his racial and cultural characteristics. Oh, let me share, just in case, because I don't know, I might have kind of motivated someone to want to add on. So I'm gonna share the StreamYard link in case anybody wants to jump up and react to anything that I've read so far. Guilt and inferiority are the usual consequences of this dialectic. The oppressed then tries to escape these on the one hand by proclaiming his total and unconditional adoption of the new cultural models, and on the other by pronouncing an irreversible condemnation of his own cultural style. This was the example I'm going to give now is probably the more extreme example, one that we can easily detect when we see missionaries who have historically, because we see it today, the language is just different. But go to the 19th century, early 20th century, where you see African missionaries who are in America, come to the America or to any of the Western countries, become evangelized, Christianized, become Westernized, and go back to Africa and attempt to evangelize and Christianize those Africans from their heathen ways. They will describe them, even in their writings, as heathens. Africa will be considered the dark continent, not just by Europeans, but those Africans who have been educated in the West. And so this whole civilizing and evangelizing mission, some of these missions were being led by African people. And not just Africans who came through the transatlantic slave trade, but also those Africans who came to the Americas or to the West willingly to become evangelized and go through the schools and go back. So it's that is what Frantz Fanon is talking about right here. That's what I hope I didn't. That's what's happening. Now I'm gonna go to this part again. So this is what, now that's an extreme version, but we have today we've been under this system for so long, and from generation to generation, the education that we receive has been normalized. It's become like there's no history that we can think of beyond, or that we know of beyond these shores, right? As being an enslaved people, because that's not a history that's taught to us. We've been disconnected from that culture. And so what happens here is what he's talking about. Guilt and inferiority are the usual consequences of this dialectic. The oppressed then tries to escape these on the one hand by proclaiming his total and unconditional adoption of new cultural models, and on the other by pronouncing an irreversible condemnation of his own cultural style. And so we don't have to be blatant. We've already sort of been conditioned to already reject these things. The reversal has happened to many of us already before we even came about. So we're born into a world, depending on where you are, right? You're born into a world and into a culture that has already went through this process of deculturation. And so this is why when Malcolm came with the Organization of Afro-American Unity Program, and I'm because we're in this conversation right now, I just want to pull this up because it speaks to what Malcolm X was attempting to do. Malcolm X and others, but Malcolm X was one of the leaders attempting to overturn this contradiction. So let me pull this up for a second. And shout out to Frantz Fanon, his centennial, this being 100, along with Malcolm X, 100-year anniversary of both of their born years. And so think about what I just went over, and think about what Malcolm is and others are doing in this program that was deferred because of Malcolm's assassination. And so the Basic Unity Program, I know it's a bit small on your screen. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger. All right. So right here, the basic unity program, restoration. And in the program, in order to enslave the African, it was necessary for our enslavers to completely sever our communications with the African continent and the Africans that remained there. In order to free ourselves from the oppression of our enslavers, then it is absolutely necessary for the Afro-American to restore communications with Africa. The Organization of Afro-American Unity will accomplish this goal by means of independent national and international newspapers, publishing ventures, personal contacts, and other available communications media. Hey, YouTube, we charge colonialism. That's what we're doing, carrying out this work. So we Afro-Americans must also communicate to one another the truths about American slavery and the terrible effects it has upon our people. We must study the modern system of slavery in order to free ourselves from it. We must search out all the bare and ugly facts without shame, for we are still victims, still slaves, still oppressed. Our only shame is believing falsehoods and not seeking the truth. I'm going to go to this. All right, so I'm just a little more, and I'm going to read the reorientation. We must begin to re-educate ourselves and become alert listeners in order to learn as much as we can about the progress of our motherland, Africa. We must correct in our minds the distorted image that our enslavers have portrayed to us of Africa, that he might discourage us from re-establishing communications with her and thus obtain freedom from oppression. Reorientation. In order to keep the Afro-American enslaved, it was necessary to limit our thinking to the shores of America to prevent us from identifying our problems with the problems of other people of African origin. This made us consider ourselves an isolated minority without allies anywhere. And we can see because of the assassination of Malcolm X and because of the undermining infiltration of the movements that were looking to carry on this philosophy and this program, look where we are now. And the different fringe groups that we have, these different groups who are actually doing this, that are limiting our thinking to the shores of America, that are limiting our history to the shores of America. And I'm not going to say no names or organizations, and many of us know who I'm referring to. The Organization of Afro-American Unity will develop in the Afro-American people a keen awareness of our relationship with the world at large and clarify our roles, rights, and responsibilities as human beings. So I'm going to stop there and go back to Fanon, but that was Malcolm and Organization of Afro-American Unity's attempt to overcome the contradiction that's brought about through colonialism that Frantz Fanon is talking about. Oh, okay.
Peace. I just want to say that I think that we, peace everybody, stay balanced. We can, I'm glad you shouted out your YouTube channel, but also as far as like how to re-educate the people. And a lot of it is repetition of these messages. So like, for example, the one where you said like we mimic and imitate the oppressor. I think this Frantz Fanon did that work. So we should just be like repeating messages, using social media, and that way it'll kind of stick into people's mind. And also, we don't need to argue like you say. There's so many people who say that they're not African. We could just like direct them to the source. You know what I mean? Like instead of really arguing with them and taking them seriously, look at Frantz Fanon's analysis of your mindset, so that they could hold a mirror up to them. So that's all. I just want to support what you were saying, and that's all I want to say. Thanks, Hero.
No, I appreciate that. Real quick too. Like if you was to give people examples of how to get the message across through social media, like what would that look like?
Yeah. So the first thing is it would be like, excuse me, let's say a simple carousel, and it would just have like that point, like that snippet of where he said that we
Mhm.
where he, we repeat the oppressor's mentality, but
Mhm.
then you take that and then you look at other similar authors, and then you put it together as like kind of like a research project, but like in the form of an image carousel, and then you just kind of you educate them, and then you could use examples like look at this person talking about he's not black. You could just put them up as like an example, um and that's how you re reinforce the messaging, and
Yeah,
that people will kind of get it. So I mean, we could talk about it in detail. I don't want to hold it up, but there's definitely concrete ways
for sure.
of doing that. Thank you, Hero.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, Conrad. And Uhuru da.
Uhuru, Dr. Kemp. Excuse me. Sorry. It's
Oh,
it,
good.
it ain't even 8 o'clock over here on this side of the Mississippi River.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. You on the other side, the Pacific.
Yeah. You know. I'm looking for the link because I like to take notes and I like to have my readings, and I could have swore I downloaded
The link to the book?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll put it back in the chat. Got you right here.
Perfect. Uhuru. Don't let me hold us up. Let us continue. Uhuru.
Okay, let me.
Well, I did want to introduce. Sorry. I'm deputy chair of the Black is Back Coalition's Youth and Student Working Group, where it is our mission to win Black youth and students of the Black national political agenda and the structure of the Black is Back Coalition. Join the Youth and Student Working Group, parents, instructors, students of all levels, and intellectuals. Yeah.
Right on. Let's get organized. That's what I'm talking about. All right, so here, man, I kind of want to read like the last page again, but I'm gonna keep pushing. Man. Yet the necessity, that the oppressor encounters at a given point to dissimulate the forms of exploitation does not lead to the disappearance of this exploitation. The more elaborate, less crude economic relations require a daily coating, but the alienation at this level remains frightful. Again, going back to Reconstruction, the Reconstruction period, where we see the rise of sharecropping, we see the rise of the exploitation of tenant farmers. We see convict leasing, peonage, and I go back to that period because I think that it when you give those extreme cases, it's more it's easier for people to understand with Fanon or just it's easy to understand the analysis, I think. But it's still happening today. We don't have to go back that far. But I think what Fanon is getting to, it becomes more subtle. It becomes more subtle over time. And yeah, I just wanted to raise that point. So, as the terms that he used here is coat, right? What he said, right here, where he put that at? Yet the necessity that the oppressor encounters at a given point to dissimulate the forms of exploitation does not lead to the disappearance of this exploitation. The more elaborate, less crude economic relations, there it is, require a daily coating, but the alienation at this level remains frightful. It definitely does. Having judged, condemned, abandoned his cultural forms, his language, his food habits, his sexual behavior, his way of sitting down, of resting, of laughing, of enjoying himself, the oppressed flings himself upon the imposed culture with the desperation of a drowning man. Developing his technical knowledge in contact with more and more perfected machines entering into the dynamic circuit of industrial production, meeting men from remote regions in the framework of the concentration of capital. That is to say, on the job, discovering the assembly line, the team production, time, in other words, yield per hour, the oppressor is shocked to find that he continues to be the object of racism and contempt. It is at this level that racism is treated as a question of persons. There are a few hopeless races, but you must admit that on the whole, the population likes. With time, all this will disappear. This is the country where there is the least amount of race prejudice. At the United Nations, there is a commission to fight race prejudice, films on race prejudice, poems on race prejudice, messages on race prejudice, spectacular and futile condemnations of race prejudice. In reality, a colonial country is a racist country. If in England and Belgium or in France, despite the democratic principles affirmed by these respective nations, there are still races. It is these races who, in their oppression to the country as a whole, are logically consistent. It is not possible to enslave men without logically making them inferior through and through. And racism is only the emotional, affective, sometimes intellectual explanation of this inferiorization. The races in a culture with racism is therefore normal. Yeah, the races in a culture with racism is therefore normal.
And I wanted to pause and
go ahead.
And I wanted to pause and get in on these definitions that the
he's going there right now.
Yeah. So the way that I like to look at these texts, right? Because classmates and peers are always asking me, how do you do independent political and social analysis? And what I do is in my reading, I'm looking for the definitions that the author offers, right? So we understand that a colonial country is a racist country, like period. We need to write that down. Everybody pause,
right.
Write that down, right? So that means that all countries that we know it in this here map that was drawn by colonialism, each and every one of those countries established by settler colonialism are inherently racist, period. And there's several definitions of racism that Fanon offers us throughout this work, right? However, on this page, particularly on page 40, he defines racism as only the emotional, affective, sometimes intellectual explanation of inferiorization. Oh.
How come I got lost? Where's that at? Is that at the top?
Yes, that's so a colonial country is a racist country, right? Yeah. And then the second paragraph, the end of the second paragraph. And then of course I'm kind of paraphrasing. This is a skill, of course, that definitely we need our post-secondary African students to be up on being able to paraphrase and so just slightly, to make it because the way that I imagine these definitions is they will go into our Uhuru dictionary, our Uhuru thesaurus, and our Uhuru textbook series.
No, and I appreciate you pausing. There was a lot that was said. I was caught up in the moment too, because Fanon is dropping bars right now. So I'm just like, I want to stop. I want to stop, but I want to keep going. And so I'm glad you paused me. One thing I want to bring up too is what Fanon is getting at, and he's stating this, he's articulating this in other ways too in this chapter, but he's getting to that point of the purpose of racism and how it really is serving the fundamental contradiction, which is political economic domination, which is colonialism, right? Which is the materialist basis of our oppression and exploitation. So when you look here, going back to what you just read, the definition, you say, and racism is only the emotional, affective, sometimes intellectual explanation of this inferiorization. But this inferiorization, the point, the reason or the cause of this inferiorization is the material exploitation. Like it's the physical, that oppression and exploitation of the land, of the labor of African people and other kinds of people, but African people in this case. So just understand, like, this is what Fanon is like really bringing out when he's saying this. But he's focusing on racism for a specific reason, though, because it does have an impact. But he's very clear on what the fundamental contradiction is. And so he says the racist, and we're going to wrap up in a sec. But I'm gonna let you, Hudan, respond to this.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to respond now? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I first off that thank you for spitting that hot fire, Uhuru. But it's crazy that we're on this because, you know, this semester I got to do U.S. History 1, which perplexes and vexes me.
Yeah.
And one of the first questions that we had to answer was, did slavery come first or did racism come first? And, you know, it's always interesting taking the entry level like history and social science, humanities and social science courses, because as an African internationalist, right, I already have a theory that explains the world, right? But professors and instructors have to pursue or like come at the introductory levels as if, like, you know, almost as if there is no such thing as having a foundation before right coming into this space. And and when we're reading things like this, and it's very right, the chronological order in which these ideas come, we understand that racism is, like Chairman teaches, is just an idea in white folks' head. However, it was systematized, right?
Yeah. Hey, and appreciate that. I'm gonna see if both of y'all want to react to this. I'm gonna just do one more paragraph. Actually supposed to be jumping into a meeting. But this is too good, man. This is too good.
That's liberalism.
I'm dying, bro. I'm dying.
Let me finish this one more. Let's do it. All right. The racist in a culture with racism is therefore normal. He has achieved the perfect harmony of economic relations and ideology. The idea that one forms of man, to be sure, is never totally dependent on economic relations, in other words, and this must not be forgotten, on relations existing historically and geographically among many groups. An ever greater number of members belonging to racist societies are taking a position. They are dedicating themselves to a world in which racism would be impossible, but everyone is not up to this kind of objectivity, this abstraction, this solemn commitment. One cannot with impunity require of a man that he be against the prejudices of his group. And we repeat, every colonialist group is racist. Acculturized and deculturized at one and the same time, the oppressed continues to come up against racism. He finds this sequel illogical, what he has left behind him inexplicable, without motive, incorrect. His knowledge, the appropriation of precise and complicated techniques, sometimes his intellectual superiority as compared to a great number of races, lead him to qualify the racist world as passion charged. He perceives that the racist atmosphere impregnates all the elements of the social life. The sense of an overwhelming injustice is correspondingly very strong. Forgetting racism as a consequence, one concentrates on racism as cause. Campaigns of de-intoxication are launched. Appeal is made to the sense of humanity, to love, to respect for the supreme values, and we have to stop there. It's 11:01. Any reactions before we?
Just want to focus on what Fanon says, but everyone is not up to this kind of objectivity, this abstraction, and this solemn commitment. Let's everybody write that down, because we understand that is what Fanon literally, if I was I would definitely intro to African history, right? 1, and we read in Fanon, right? This gonna be on the quiz, right? And it also relates back to what Chairman Mao Zedong tells us, that we must avoid being subjectivity, superficiality, and single-sidedness, right? The opposite of that is objectivity, abstraction, and solemn commitment.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna need to process that, because I didn't really fully understand that passage. So maybe next week I can come back with that understanding. But shout out to y'all. It didn't, kind of went over my head.
Yeah, and I went through it pretty fast. I'm trying not to be liberal, who pointed out. So let's get up out here. But appreciate everybody tapping in. We're gonna continue. We're actually at the end of this chapter, so I'll finish it up when we come back, and we can move on to another chapter. But y'all don't have to wait for me. Y'all have the book. Definitely go through it, and we're gonna come back next week and build. Frank should be back next week. And shout out to Natasha. She's working hard on that dissertation, so we giving her grace, because I know how that is. So, but shout out to you all too. Make sure that you like, you share, and those who are joining for the first time, subscribe to the channel where we charge colonialism. Visit the website, look at the latest articles. Shout out to Nehemiah, who has been posting articles left and right, man. So go check those out, and in my most recent article. So until next time, Uhuru, Black Power.
Vanguard up.
Vanguard up.
Uhuru.
The white power structure, because that's all we have in America. And the white power structure today is just as much interested in perpetuating slavery as the white power structure was 100 years ago. Only now they use modern methods of doing so. And realizing that the black people in this country are waking up and becoming filled with a desire to be looked upon as men and as human beings. The white power structure, to slow down that struggle for freedom and human dignity, uses tricks. 100 years ago they could do it with chains. Today they use tricks. And one of the tricks that they've invented is this token integration, to get Negroes, so-called Negro leaders, to accept a few token crumbs of integration that don't solve any problem for the masses of black people in this country whatsoever, but it does make the hand-picked Negroes be satisfied, to slow down the cry of the masses. And a good example of that is, as soon as the spirit of rebellion or revolution began to spread among the masses of black people in this country, and they began to take an active part, and they showed that they weren't confined to this non-violent approach, then the government or the power structure began to sit up and take notice and